I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the slave shacks that I believe still exist. As I was coming down to Livingston, Texas, from the north, taking the highway, combining my experience just coming down here, walking around the woods behind the Walmarts, that's along the highway, and visiting the museum today, learning more about the history of the area and putting things together. Now, when I drove down here, there was like this change in the landscape. I started seeing houses along this highway, a 75-mile-an-hour highway, and there's people living on the side of this highway like it's in a regular neighborhood, like it's a 25, 30 to 35 mile an hour road, and the people are living right next to the highway. And it's just lined with houses, abandoned houses, broken down old shacks, and some people have built new houses even. But what's really interesting, there's real life going on along the highway, and that's not common at all. This is new to me. Seeing a 75-mile-an-hour highway with houses lined on the side of it. And I was coming down about when school got out because people had to stop for a school bus and let out some black children on a 75-mile-an-hour highway. People had to stop for a school bus. I got so confused when the school bus started stopping again. I thought I had to stop, but it pulled over to the side more, and I didn't quite. I could drive past it, but I was slowing down right behind it for some weird reason. But there's these shacks that line this highway, and you don't see that in other states. I didn't really even see it on the west side of Texas. My memory isn't perfect, but this really gets my attention because it's just so dangerous to see people, like, they got lawn chairs, they got yards. These people are like lounging in front of their houses right next to the highway coming down here. And I don't see how they can find any joy in living on the highway. It's just so noisy. The traffic's just so fast. It's not neighborly in any way. Most people who live like kind of off a highway have their houses much further back, not coming down to Livingston. Now, I walked behind the Walmart using my walking sticks. Where are they? These suckers are my walking sticks. I have found a new joy in walking through woods. I've used the collapsible ones so I can put them in my bag. I also have wooden ones that don't collapse. I use those next for exercise. That's when I started using the walking sticks. But now I've discovered I can get through woods, over logs, up hills, ravines, and when I trip, it's no big deal. I got more stability in my movements, and I'm working my triceps much more. It's pretty nice. And these woods are thick behind Walmarts. I found a homeless encampment with maybe 1,000 beer cans. It's a aluminum can recycler's dream in one spot behind this Walmart's. Some people, because there was like, well, 4 tents collapsed. The campsite looks to be at least over a year old, and cans left behind, like a hill of cans. It's crazy. But I'm guessing they probably bought from Walmart's and just went back and forth, having parties in the woods, enjoying their alcoholism in the woods behind Walmart's. If they had the money, I guess they can get away with it. But further in the woods, and the woods is between the park and Walmart. And there is some private property signs. I avoided that. But along the highway, I came across an abandoned slave shack. Now that I'm more familiar with the style of house. And I've recorded it, but I'm just talking about it now. I'll post it later in a few weeks' time. But it's peculiar. It's old. The front porch roof fell down. Uh, Walking around it, and I looked inside it too. Actually, I was able to open a door and look inside. But walking around the outside of it, it's up. It's raised up. So when there's flooding, it's ready for maybe a 3 foot, even a three up to about a 3 foot high flood through the area. Anything higher, and then it's vulnerable. But I didn't see. There's no windows, and I think that's a standard for slave shacks. The slave shack looks like a barn. It has no windows. It had a couple of doors. Everything was self-contained, and you just have doors. And this what's the style of a slave shack? I mean, I have to learn more about it, but I think it's more in line with being like a barn. When I looked inside, there was hay. There was also an old army duffel bag, so that people came and went after it got abandoned. You know, I don't fully grasp the life of this shack, this small house that looks like a barn practically. But it's like there's several like odds and end materials used to put it together. It wasn't really built professionally. But it had no windows. It just made me think of a barn, especially with the hay inside. And there were rooms in there, but I mean there was no like clear kitchen area, living room. You don't know which room is which. They were all about equally small rooms. But to think people lived in that thing, I think that's amazing. The way what they had to put up with. This is like pioneer stuff, but in modern times. They're living in like a log, not a log house. A log house might have been a little bit nicer, but I mean that's depending on the area too. Because log houses, you don't have to build them 3 feet high off the ground in preparation for floods. I've been to a few old log houses. It's like some in the mountains. They just use the dirt as their floor. They don't have to be too concerned about flooding. Around here, you got to be concerned about that flooding. So they build it up, and it's like a barn built up on a higher level, but it's kind of like a house, but kind of a barn, but very cheaply put together. And this has seen better days. What I walked around, I can't quite make out exactly the type of activity that occurred at this property. It's not so visible. This one isn't so visible from the highway, but the highway is very close. It's just the tree line blocks a lot of the view. And a lot of the houses that I drove past coming down here, you could see, and then you could see old ones and some in various states of repair. But going to the museum over here, I learned a little bit. I learned the term slave shack for one, and there wasn't too much information on the slave shacks. But just the mere mention of it and a little old time picture of children sitting on the front porch of this kind of tiny house built up higher off the grounds. I kind of put two and two together. I put the ideas together that this museum, which is free, it's nice. I just go in and look around, and it's got some pretty good long hours. And there's definitely mention of slavery and like I think there's 4,000 slaves up until the Civil War. And I don't think this shack that I saw, like it's kind of the style of a slave shack. It's like I don't think it came from the mid 1800s. I think it's probably early 1900s. Maybe late 1800s at some points, but that style is still there. Still, the oppression is still there. The evidence is all around in this area. Cotton apparently was a big produce crop for this area. I haven't seen any cotton fields. I don't know where they are. Even on the map, I didn't see like any evidence. I'm looking, I look for fields of white or something. I seen lots of cotton fields on the west side of Texas, but not on the east. And maybe I don't think I visited too many museums on the west side of Texas, so I could have learned more about the slave trade that on the west side if it existed. I'm only becoming aware of the east side. The higher vegetative, the more the bigger trees, more vegetation on the east side, compared to the west side. Which the west side, they got cotton. It's much drier, more desert-like conditions over there, and they use the big specially made tractors to collect the cotton. It's interesting. Did it grab? I don't know what the pattern. Did it gravitate from the east to the west, or is it always been on the east and west? I would think cotton needs drier conditions, but I mean during the 1800s, it's hard. There's different difficulties using human labor and the way the tractors were at that. Everything was done by hands. There was in this museum displays of old plows. They're used by hands, not none of these big tractors like we see today. So it's maybe they couldn't migrate to the west of Texas for cotton production because of not the technology just wasn't there. So they relied on human labor on the east side, and just had to make do with wetter conditions with the cotton. Maybe cotton handles well in wet conditions. I don't know, but I think it's interesting and really a sign of oppression right along the highway to see them houses, and it's interesting. I'm just getting like it's a kind of a culture shock. This actually became a culture shock for me. I mean, I did live in Shreveport, but that was when I was in the military, so I wasn't too exposed. I was in the city. I really never got out to explore around, but coming down now, I'm really starting to see. I mean, I seen in Kansas the historical signs talking about slaves escaping and becoming free through the underground tunnels or whatever. But now I'm getting down into a more southern area where slavery was much more active, and we have names of the old slave owners and how many they had on how many people they owned. It's like only 1 out of 4 families had one slave, maybe more. That was the statistics, and I think they're trying to focus. The museum is really good. It's really informative. They're focusing on just this county. I forget the name of the county for what Livingston is in, but it's interesting, and I think I'm seeing signs beyond outside of now with the museum giving me a little more background what to look for. I believe that this is a row of slave shacks that were and continue to be like the family generation after generation living on the side of the highway, and there's maybe some kind of a weird regulation or the city, you can't call them city leaders, the government representatives. The representatives are allowing this to happen, and it's a really concern because that's dangerous. So there's the element of danger that's as being forgiven for the people, for the culture around here, that the representatives are allowing certain dangers to occur for this culture, and it probably stems from a historical there's probably a historical standpoint that explains it.